Good. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. So my name is Larika, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, so EPFL in Switzerland. And it's really a pleasure for me to be here today with you. So before we dive into the discussion, I'd like just to introduce our moderator, Tyler Fehini. Tyler is an assistant professor in the mathematics department at the United States Naval Academy. So Tyler, thank you so much for moderating today's panel and also helping so much with the organization of this event.
Yeah, happy to be
so
here.
Now let's meet our panelists who bring really a diverse range of expertise and also, I think, perspective on today's discussion. So today we're excited to have with us first Bilur Aksoy, who is an assistant professor of economics at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Next, we have Priyank Arora, an assistant professor of management science at the Darla Moore School of Business at the University of South Carolina. And also we have joining us for Columbia University, we have Yaren Bilge-Kaya, a lecturer in Industrial Engineering and Operations Research Department. And also last but certainly not the least, we have Sulaiman Giwa, who is an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at the Memorial University. So thank you all for being here today. So to get started, I'd just like to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. So please, if you're comfortable with it, please share your pronouns, your degree, and a response maybe to our opening question, which is, when in your career did you start engaging with LGBTQ plus topics? So maybe we can start with Bilur.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you again for organizing this panel. Excited to be here. I'm Bilur Aksoy. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have a PhD in economics from Texas A&M University, and I'm currently an assistant professor in the econ department here. I got interested in the topics during my PhD studies, but I did not start engaging in research back then. I do experimental economics, and back then I did not think that it would be possible to do experimental work that with LGBTQ individuals that could be generalizable. And so I had some technical concerns back then. But in the last 4 or 5 years or so, especially during COVID, I started becoming more aware of the tools that I could use in doing the research that I do now. I also started engaging with other researchers who do this research through virtual seminars, conferences, and so on. So I've been doing this research for the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years or so.
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe we can continue with Priyank.
Yes, thank you. I echo their thoughts that I want to thank you and Tyler for organizing this panel. Happy to be here. I am Priyank Arora. My pronouns are he, him. I have a PhD in operations management from Georgia Tech. Just one correction, because my role change happened just 10 days ago. So I feel I still remember, like I want to point that out. Now I'm an associate professor. Anyway, so I would, thank you. So I would say that equity, inclusion, and societal impact guided my dissertation. That's what I spent my time in my PhD and in the last few years researching on. So like they were the heart of whatever I was doing, but I never directly engaged with LGBTQ plus topics. And that changed when I was very close to submitting my tenure packet before last year's summer. That's when I took the full plunge, and I published a research article in POM on how we as operations management researchers can engage with these topics. So it was more like a thought piece, making an appeal for our field to engage with these topics because they're quite relevant and pertinent to what we do. And since then, I have been working with several interested colleagues on topics which are fully directly engaging with this. Also, I would like to point one thing, like even though I didn't directly start with research on this field, I started engaging in the service element, which was in the form of founding the Pride Forum, serving as its first president. So I think there is always a path to it. And I think, as Bilur said, it's something always brewing, and then one day it's the time to take the plunge.
Thank you, Frank. And now maybe you can go with Yaren.
Hello, everyone. This is Yaren Bilgekaya. I am currently a lecturer at Columbia University's Industrial Engineering and Operations Research Department. I received my PhD from Northeastern University in year 2022 or 3, actually. I am forgetting it, but I've been a lecturer for the past year. And I started doing research on LGBTQ issues during my PhD. Now that I'm a junior faculty, I think I had a little bit more access to the right tools, thankfully. And I was receiving my PhD in Operations Research and Social Justice Lab, and my research focused on mainly improving equitable access to public services for all, and that had to include LGBTQ populations. And that's how I started, and I still am working on LGBTQ issues.
Thank you, Yaren. And then we can finish with Suleiman. Can you please introduce yourself?
Thanks so much for that, and good morning, everyone. My name is Suleiman Giwa, and my pronouns are he, him, and is. I have a PhD in social work from York University, which I earned in 2017. My engagement, I guess, with LGBTQ plus topics really began during my undergrad when I was finishing my undergrad in criminology and law with a minor in women's studies. And this kind of shaped the trajectory of my career in terms of my research, but also my academic career. And I've been focusing intensively on the subject of LGBTQ plus communities and experiences since 2008. So spanning about 16 years now.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for introducing yourself. I realized when you were talking that I forgot to mention my own pronouns. So I go by they, them. And for the audience, please know that if you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them in the Q&A, and we will assess them at the very end of the presentation. So now I give the floor to Tyler and our panelists.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to start a discussion with everyone. We have different fields of research represented, and across the operations, research, and management sciences, or ORMS, if I use the acronym. And we have perspectives from outside ORMS as well. And so we're going to get started with what I want to ask first is, why do you believe it's important to incorporate LGBTQ plus perspectives into research within your field of research, whatever that is? And I'll open the floor to any of the panelists.
I can go maybe first. So my research is in the public sector, public service access, like I mentioned, and particularly I've been focusing on housing access for runaway and homeless youth in order to reduce their vulnerability to exploitative situations like human trafficking. While doing that, we have done surveys with runaway and homeless youth, approximately 350 of them in New York City. And while doing that, we have realized that runaway and homeless youth are mainly identifying as LGBTQ. We realized that although the previous research that we have looked into was saying that the percentage was around 20 to 30%, we realized the population was actually increasing. It was around 50%. Maybe people felt more comfortable identifying themselves nowadays, and doing this research, doing this survey actually put that into perspective. And we've also realized that the service needs of these youth are very, very much different than their non-LGBTQ peers. We also have worked with on ground with shelters, the organizations that serve runaway and homeless youth, and we realized that they do not have the capability to adequately meet their needs. So this motivated us to incorporate LGBTQ youth perspectives more into our research, because we realized that if we didn't do that, this was actually going to worsen the disparity. So that was our main motivation. And that's why I think it is very important to not worsen the disparity.
Maybe I could add my perspective there. So I would qualify by saying that compared to my other esteemed panelists, I'm new to this arena per se. So it's more of a perspective from somebody who's getting into this and starting with the initial aspect, and also based on what I have learned from my research on nonprofit and other dimensions. So how I view my field, operations management, at its fundamental core is managing supply with demand, allocating resources to meet an intended objective. And for the long time, we have defined them as variables, indicating them by S, D, X. But what is at the heart of these variables? It's humans who are actually the resources that we talk about. So these humans come with a lot of intricacies, and our behavioral economists and sociologists have shown that, and businesses have started to accept that. So in that regard, just from the curiosity lens, which I think should drive academics, it's something to really, it's an opportunity for us to see that how do the unique aspects and dimensions of these resources, which can be attributed to being part of the LGBTQ community, how can those actually be incorporated in this matching of supply and demand, in this resource allocation that we talk about? Does the service design need to change? Does the product design need to change? Does there need to be another sequence of how we are used to setting up our processes? And also, do we even need to redefine our objective function altogether? So I think those are the things that I think from curiosity lens should make us motivated to work in this on these topics. But if that lens doesn't appeal to you, then I feel my literature review has revealed that we, in our top journals that are used by business schools for evaluation of faculty, I found only 2 papers in the last several decades that have LGBTQ topic at its core. And I want to give a shout out to one of the attendees, Chris Parker, who is a co-author on one of those papers. But then our allied fields, strategy, organization behavior, economics, public policy, they are working on these topics. So we risk our relevance if we just turn a blind eye. So I think it's not just about relevance, it's also about how much impact we can create by bringing operations management perspective. We are experts in process design. We're experts in optimization. We're experts in supply chain, inventory. So these perspectives can be added to the conversation, which is already happening. It's not like that conversation is not happening. So that's my 2 cents.
If I may, Yaran and Priyank did an excellent job kind of talking about this and bringing a motivation to it, perhaps bringing a little bit more econ motivation into this, and building on what you guys already said. We know that LGBTQ plus people face a lot of unique economic challenges. So there's documented wage gaps, discrimination in the workplace, access to healthcare, and so on. And to really understand these issues and how economic policies might impact LGBTQ communities differently, we need to dig into their experiences. And by doing that, we can craft policies that are both fairer and more effective. So I see that as one of the reasons why we should be incorporating LGBTQ plus perspectives into our research. But thinking about it from a broader level within economics, incorporating this perspective also help us build better economic models. So one of our primary goals, Priyank also mentioned this in the context of his field, but one of our primary goals in economics research is to better understand and predict behavior. And if we leave out the experiences of LGBTQ plus individuals, we are kind of missing a big piece of that puzzle. What that means is that our predictions and policies could be really off the mark. So by incorporating these perspectives, we get a fuller picture, which leads us to do better predictions and create better policies. So at the end, including these perspectives, I don't think isn't just about doing the right thing socially, which is also important, but it also helps the entire field.
And I think just kind of building on that point as well. So for me, I'm an interdisciplinary researcher, so I'm kind of cross between social work, criminal justice systems, and women's studies, and so on and so forth. And I think for me, in order to be able to answer this question specifically, I think I'll probably limit it to social work itself, which is really the substantive where my substantive position is really in. And I think when we think about, the core of social work, it's really about uplifting marginalized communities and also trying to address disparities and advocate for vulnerable populations, which includes LGBTQ plus communities and individuals who are historically, and I would argue presently, have also faced significant marginalization, as Bilal was kind of alluding to earlier. And I think making it imperative for social work, therefore, to also kind of focus on this particular population in terms of centering their experiences and also their needs. And I also think that by integrating LGBTQ perspectives into the research, we ensure that our research is also reflective of the diversity of the people that are actually diverse within our communities and the realities that they also bring to the table. And I think to the point that Bilal was making, the inclusivity of this also enriches our understanding of what some of the social issues are that LGBTQ plus populations and communities are actually facing on a day-to-day basis, and as a way to kind of begin to develop some of the wraparound support and services and interventions that are very timely and responsive to some of those concerns. And it also allows us to be able to develop more effective interventions long-term, as I said, policies and also some of the practices that are specifically tailored to the unique needs of LGBTQ people. Because again, one of the things that we don't want to be doing is to be reproducing the status quo, both in terms of the heteronormativity, in terms of the way we think, but also the cisnormativity in terms of the ways in which we think about our collective sense of being. And then I think finally, this approach to kind of including LGBTQ populations into the research is also about enhancing the broader academic community, right? So by encouraging sort of interdisciplinary collaboration, which is really, really key to be able to kind of inform the kaleidoscope of the ways in which we actually address some of the issues that we see. But LGBTQ issues also intersect with various domains such as public health, psychology, education and law, as an example. And I think by incorporating different perspectives from this arena, social work is also situated in a way that it can begin to engage with and contribute to a wider conversation on a range of academic discourses, promoting a holistic understanding of LGBTQ people, both in terms of the lived experiences, but also in terms of the living experiences that we see on the ground.
Very cool. Thank you to all the panelists. I mean, like from every angle, there's beautiful motivation for why this is such an important research topic. But for years I shared Bilur's experience, which is like, well, I would like to see that research, but I don't know what that research looks like. And so what I'd like to do now is shift gears and have some research specific questions where each panelist can talk a little bit about their specific research. So to give the audience a feel of like, what does modern LGBT research look like in or outside of ORMS? So Yalan, I'd like to start with you. And so you've already brought up the homeless youth that you worked with and that you worked specifically with the LGBTQ identifying homeless youth. So can you help us understand what were the specific needs, not just of the homeless youth, but the needs of the LGBTQ individuals and like how that played a role in their needs?
Yeah, of course. Even before going into the particular support services that they need from these housing providing organizations, we have seen some trends. For example, while we were doing this survey, we were not just asking them what type of services that you would like to receive from these organizations, but we also asked them, where would you like to receive these services and in which setting, from a smaller shelter, from a large shelter, who do you feel comfortable accommodating with? And we have realized that among all the shelter types that we have had, for example, female only, male only, or doesn't matter the gender or the sexual orientation, we have realized that LGBTQ only shelters were the most in need in New York City. Approximately 30% of the youth basically said that they would feel more safer and comfortable living with people that are alike, that identify like themselves. So this brought us the issue of not just deploying capacity and a lack of capacity in New York City to provide housing services to all runaway and homeless youth, but we realized that a lot of LGBTQ youth are, even if they're able to receive services, they're not staying in the preferred type of shelters currently. So we realized that they need more of a community feeling when we do this survey. After that, we have taken a simulation route. We have simulated LGBTQ youth shelter using discrete event simulation. And using that, we have seen that a lot of the different services that they currently provide in those shelters is also lacking in capacity, such as mental health support, substance abuse support, legal assistance, or personal connections to case management, like asking, for example, this is a crisis emergency shelter, meaning that I will be able to stay here for 30 days. However, when this 30 days fills, where am I going to go, right? Like they need, most of the time you realize that they need more support finding these type of assistance and the person to connect with. So that was one of the most crucial things that we have realized, LGBTQ specific services that they would feel safer and more comfortable reaching out to. That was one of the most important ones, I would say. But besides that, they've also seen that a higher need to medical services needed by LGBTQ youth, like sexual transmitted disease testing, for example, was more requested by LGBTQ youth. And another thing that we have also seen that LGBTQ youth were, the whole population, we call them as runaway and homeless youth, but there are different ways that they can come to that situation and become unstably housed. And one of them is being kicked out of the house. And we realized that a lot of LGBTQ youth were actually, did not run away from their houses, but rather kicked out. And this puts them in a more vulnerable situation to experience exploitative situations. So we have actually realized that there is a huge gap in service provision, particularly for LGBTQ in New York City. And I have a feeling that if this research or a similar type of research was to be done in a different country, different city, I have a feeling we would find similar things.
That's very interesting, and it helps illustrate how, you know, social work is just wrapped around in systems and systems and systems and limited resources and limited resources, limited resources. And that's really where ORMS tools can like come to be really useful. And so that's a very helpful perspective.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking too. Like in our paper, for example, when I share it with common folk, my friends who are not engineers or do not have PhDs, when I tell them that, yes, the capacity is lacking in New York City to provide services to LGBTQ, they're like, yes, I can see that. Like they live in New York City and they're like, yes, we can see it like with our own eyes. This is not something like, they're like, did you even need to do the research for this? I'm like, yes, someone needs to do the research for it and we have the right tools.
Right. Yeah, and that having the right tool part is key, and I'm excited to like really have that be illustrated throughout today's panel. And Yaron, your research touches on like a huge, massive social problem, which is homelessness, which obviously requires a lot of different perspectives and approaches to handle it. And so I want to bring Dr. or Suleiman into this conversation too. So Suleiman, you have a paper that establishes like 12 fundamental ethical principles that all researchers should follow, and it takes into account these LGBTQ identities and inclusion. And so can you give us a flavor of these principles, for instance, starting with which one of these principles do you believe is most frequently violated?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes, so this was a labor of love actually that involved a collaboration between myself and several other academics across, across the globe. Essentially, there were a couple of other academics from Canada, one from New Zealand, and we went to a conference in Montreal. And from that emerged a synergy of energy and interest around putting together a set of principles for guiding LGBTQ plus research. We've been noticing, from our different respective kind of research that we've been doing, some of the challenges and complexities that is involved with doing research with these particular vulnerable marginalized communities. And we wanted to kind of sketch some kind of ideas that, perhaps might be worthwhile for folks who are involved in that kind of research to be thinking around some of those issues and challenges. So I can certainly suggest that maybe there are more than just one, in terms of the frequently violated one of the principles, but I think I will maybe speak to one quickly and then spotlight the other one that I really want to talk about. The first one is really one of the ethical principles that I really think gets violated when we're doing LGBTQ plus related research is really the tendency to think of intersectionality as being additive. Treating social categories of identity as being independent and mutually exclusive. When in reality, a lot of the research evidence actually suggests that the opposite is actually true, that categories very much interlock and they're mutually reinforcing of one another. So I think so. This is one of the focal points that I see recurring oftentimes in research is tendencies to want to kind of pigeonhole identities as if they are singular when in fact they're actually intersecting and interlocking. But another ethical concern that I'm also seeing, and the one that I want to spotlight, is really about ensuring the failure to actually ensure adequate compensation for the time participants actually contribute to research projects. And this is highlighted in our ethical principle number 11, right? And I think the premise here is that if we begin from the standpoint that research participants are experts in their own lives and that they bring this expertise to bear in the research that they're actually engaged in, then I think it then follows that we as researchers, as academics and funders should also be doing due diligence in terms of the ways we think about compensations for those individual participants when they're engaged in the project. And oftentimes what happens is that researchers often fail to actually budget adequately in terms of their research funding requests for those participants that are actually engaged in their work. And then as a result of that, we're actually not fairly or adequately compensating people who are actually sharing about their lived experience. Oftentimes, this can be traumatizing experiences that we're asking people to talk about, and there's no compensation to necessarily compensate for those experiences. And I think that, when we're thinking about the populations, we're talking about today LGBTQ people and the intersections of identities that also cross-connect within those particular population, the issue, it becomes even more critical when you're thinking about, marginalized, vulnerable communities. For instance, people who are racialized, people who are indigenized or indigenous populations here in Canada, as an example. Thinking about things of racialization of poverty, which we see very much seeped within our communities, depending on the pockets of experiences that you're looking at. And when these intersections and considerations are not taken into mind, we see the default in terms of the ways in which we are inappropriately extrapolating or excavating information and knowledges from people, but again, not fairly appropriately compensating them. And I make no, I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that, we can pay people or uplift them out of poverty by, simply just paying them, compensations or remunerations or for the time that they're giving to the research. But I think what I'm suggesting here and what my team and I are suggesting here is that the ways in which we begin to engage in research should also include a reconsideration of the ways in which we think about compensating participants, particularly those from marginalized, vulnerable populations in our research, and to make sure that we're thinking about this from the outset rather than when the research project is already started and we're thinking about, oh, maybe did we budget enough for the participants' experiences or their contribution to the study, or did we not? Oftentimes you need to think about this ahead of time rather than later when the research is actually begun or ended.
And to me, that's such an important key takeaway from the whole paper is that it really establishes a crucial cornerstone for where researchers should start. When you're planning your research, you should be incorporating fundamental ethical principles and keeping in mind the LGBTQ experiences, which, as you say, there's often a lot of trauma involved depending on the type of research that you're doing, and compensation can be a really important part of that. And so I really appreciate that perspective and highlighting that principle specifically. I want to shift gears and make sure and open a question to everyone. So we've brought up a few times research tools that can come very useful in our fields of study. So I'll just ask for the group. So what are some research tools from your field that you believe are primed and ready to take on research relating to these more difficult LGBTQ plus topics?
Maybe I can mention a couple of, maybe three things. The first one is not specific to my field. I think I've been doing a lot of research on Prolific. If you're interested in having access to, I'm going to call it a little bit more general LGBTQ population, because that kind of people can join the Prolific platform from all over the country, but also from many different places. It's a great participant recruitment platform to do this research, which made it possible for me to start doing the research that I do. So Prolific is a great resource. I want to mention a paper that I published with a couple of co-authors, Ian Chad and Boon-Han Ko, last year in European Economic Review, where we introduced a task, we call it an icon task, that allows participants to anonymously reveal their LGBTQ affinity. We use that task to study sexual minorities' anticipated discrimination, their willingness to reveal their LGBTQ minority status, but also studying discrimination towards those who reveal that identity in a pro-social domain. That can be adapted to study many different types of research questions. So I just want to mention that. And one last thing I want to mention is we have an official American Economic Association committee on the status of LGBTQ individuals in the economics profession, short for CSQEP. They have been doing amazing work, which I would like to talk about later if we have time. But one of the things that I want to mention is they've been compiling a list of data sets that contain sexual minority and sexual orientation and gender identity data, both domestic data sets and international data sets. So if you're interested in doing research using pre-existing data sets, just check out their website. It's on the AEA's website. I think that's an incredible resource.
Maybe I can just add, because I was looking, so my field, operations management, we primarily have, two dominant tools that folks use: mathematical economic models or data. So for data, I did go to AEA's website because I feel economics is several decades ahead of where we need to be. And I saw that they have compiled that data set. So I wanted to share that. The other thing I wanted to highlight here is that before we start building, stylized tools and optimization models, I think we need to understand the nuances behind the decision making of LGBTQ clients, employees, markets, however your research defines the landscape. And for that, we can learn tremendously from the behavioral operations management researchers. So I know experiments have been used in several of the allied fields, but then from an operational standpoint, like how do you design an experiment that can capture the operational lens when the clients have to go through different decisions? So we can learn from our esteemed colleagues who have been working and publishing for last 2 decades or more on behavioral operations management, and apply those tools to first understand how this decision making is impacted in a unique way, salient way. And then we can have follow-up papers where we capture those dimensions into optimization. I think the way Yeren is doing to do, I think, like, how does this specific need can change our operational decisions? Last thing I'll close out by saying, I don't know if my co-author who's here, Dorothy, smiled when Billur mentioned Prolific, because we have just finished running a pilot study last week, and we're planning to run our study, which is very LGBTQ specific. And maybe when Tyler asks me about research, I can mention more about it. So I think Prolific is a great platform for conducting these experiments.
Awesome, thank you.
I guess I'll quickly add. Oh,
Go ahead,
Please
Suleiman.
go ahead, Suleiman.
sorry about that. I'll be very quick. I think that two other, frameworks that I guess I can introduce into the conversations from a social work perspective is really about the person in the environment perspective. I've been talking a lot about intersectionality, so that's another framework that we could potentially, be talking a lot about in terms of how it actually helps us to understand LGBTQ plus experiences. But specific to social work, though, person in environment perspective is really one that has been very helpful to us in terms of trying to understand the individual in relations to the environment, right? So thinking about, the connections between the individual to systems such as family, community, workplace or legal systems, and so on and so forth, and how those intersect in terms of either uplifting the experiences of an individual, or family, or a group, or actually contributing to discriminatory experiences that those individuals, groups, or communities may actually be encountering. And another one is really strength-based approach to kind of thinking about LGBTQ plus experiences and lives. And this is really, really important, particularly because when you think about the research that I see in some of my field, that have been done, particularly around HIV/AIDS, PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, a lot of it, or biomedical kind of framework, a lot of it is really centered around deficit, looking at, the challenges within the communities. Whereas I think with the strength-based approach, we're actually trying to introduce a different perspective where we begin to also think about some of the resiliency, some of the creativity, solidarity that are also embedded within those communities. And this is not to in any way minimize or overlook the challenges that are embedded within those communities, but it's also saying what are some of the other stories that people have in terms of the ways in which they're navigating and living their lives beyond just a single story of just disease and deficit.
Yaron, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just very shortly. I just wanted to say that I completely agree with what everyone says. And if you're talking about the technical tools and operations research tools, I feel like we should be able to use any type of descriptive, predictive, prescriptive analytics and operations research tools to address the issues, the problems that are being faced by LGBTQ populations, as long as it follows the research ethics and incorporates equity and has the populations who are going to be impacted by the outcomes on the table. That's at least how I feel.
Great. Awesome. Thank you all for that. And so with these, various research tools that we all bring to the table, and it's so important to understand, the human behind the data point, and then eventually you can understand the data point, and then you can understand the model, all of that, right? But Laura, if we can talk about your research paper, I thought it was very interesting, specific way to use a very good tool to understand a very kind of thorny human problem where you ask a survey and you're not going to necessarily get the answer that's the true answer, right? So can you discuss a little bit about like Americans' attitudes towards LGBT individuals in the workplace, and specifically like their attitudes towards employment non-discrimination protections?
Yeah, of course. So that paper that you're referring to is co-authored. I should mention my amazing co-authors' names, Daria Sansone and Kit Carpenter. The paper is available on Management Science website. It was published earlier this year. So let me provide a quick context on that specific research that we tackle. In 2020, so I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but the Bostock versus Clayton County Supreme Court decision established that employment discrimination on the basis of sexual identity and gender identity is now prohibited. And in this paper, we study the amount of support that there is among Americans for this legal protection, specifically for transgender people, but also for LGBT individuals. Why do we study this question? Because it's important to understand how much support that there is for a legal protection like this, which would have implications in terms of its compliance and effectiveness. So that's kind of the core of this research. But as Tyler mentioned, one of the things that you may worry about in a research like this is people may not necessarily reveal their true support or opinions when asked directly in surveys. So for example, they may feel certain type of social pressure to report or respond in a certain type of way that they feel like that's the most socially appropriate way to respond. We call this effect the social desirability bias. So in order to go around this concern and elicit Americans' true views and support, we use a method called a list experiment method. Specifically, we use the double list experiment method, but it's a technical detail. It's a really smart method that enables researchers to elicit true opinions of survey takers by providing this layer of protection to individuals' responses. I don't really have time to get into the details, but please take a look at the paper if you want to learn more about that on that topic. So using a list experiment, we run our experiment on Prolific using their online representative sample of the United States, which is representative across race, sex, and age. And we mainly look at two things. First, we study American support for employment non-discrimination protection for transgender individuals. And second, we study Americans' opinion on their level of comfort having a transgender manager at work. So first of all, we do find that there's some evidence of misreporting taking place in survey responses. But when we focus on the findings from the LIST experiment, which again helps alleviate this social desirability bias concerns that I mentioned, we find that over 2/3 of Americans, around 70% or so, would be comfortable having a transgender manager at work and support employment non-discrimination protection for transgender people. So these are kind of the two main findings of our paper, but we also explore our survey data a little bit more to compare views towards transgender versus gay, lesbian, and bisexual people. When we look at our survey data, we see that labor market related support for LGBT individuals is actually higher than the support that we find for transgender people. So this is an interesting finding that perhaps highlights to the need that we need to have more transgender specific labor market interventions in order to create that workplace equality. If I have time, I can talk a little bit more about the data that we have, but I'm not sure if we have more time to discuss further details.
Can we hear quickly about the data and maybe any other facts or statistics that you found interesting?
Yeah, so the I shouldn't say most. One of the interesting findings that we explore in this paper is we look at their perceptions also about what they think other Americans think. So specifically, we ask them about their beliefs, about the share of Americans that they think would be comfortable with transgender managers, and their beliefs about the share of Americans who would support employment non-discrimination protection for transgender people. So as I mentioned, the true level that we get is around 70%, but when we look at these perceptions, they believe that only about 48% of Americans would be comfortable having a transgender manager at work. And they also believe that only about 58% of Americans would support employment non-discrimination protection for transgender individuals. So what these mean is that Americans are significantly underestimating the true level of support that there is for transgender people. And this is actually a very interesting finding, which could have important policy implications. And let me briefly tell you why that is. Research shows that the beliefs that we hold regarding what other people think, regarding what other people support, have an impact on our own beliefs and behaviors. Why is that? Because people like to adhere to social norms. If they think that a certain behavior is supported by many people, then they perceive that behavior to be more socially appropriate behavior, and thus they're going to be more likely to engage in that behavior themselves. So putting that into the context of our research, what this means is that informing Americans about the true level of support that we find in our research could actually help further increase that support that we are seeing in our paper. So again, if you'd like to learn more, please take a look at our paper, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, those are fascinating statistics that the good news is that we tend to be pessimistic and not really appreciate how much support there is. The bad news is we're not close to 100% yet, so there's still work to do.
Yes.
But that's from that platform that's come up a few times. It's a great view at like kind of large scale workforce from a big picture, like bird's eye view. And so for that, I want to bring in Priyanka as well into that conversation. So your work deals with operations and what you have coined as rainbow operations. And so can you talk a little bit about what does the LGBTQ community have to do with operations at a firm level, or let's say supply chain at a global level, and how can these be researched simultaneously?
Thank you. So as I said, this was a thought piece. So my main goal was, actually, okay, I took Suleiman's viewpoint because when I was actually thinking about writing this, I wanted to highlight not the deficit side that, oh, you need to have more screening and more HIV screening rate. I wanted to look at the value adding lens, that what is there that actually we can bring the value from operations management perspective, and by bringing the LGBTQ community within that discourse. So I divided it into LGBTQ clients, LGBTQ employees, and LGBTQ global community. You can read the paper to get my whole spiel, but I'll just quickly touch upon like what I feel to me was the most interesting pieces in that paper. So from client perspective, so what I wanted to show was that we as ORMS researchers have used several tools to address allied problems, exactly similar, but more maybe with nuances exists when you bring in the LGBTQ clients, employees, and communities. So we should be answering those as well. So one of the things I did was use one of my own papers that domestic violence survivors and homeless folks, when they come to a nonprofit, they cannot articulate what they need because they are suffering from PTSD. They themselves are not very clear on the path to resolution. So what we showed in our study was that instead of when they walk in and immediately starting to help, why don't you take some time to have this guidance session with them, advisement session, just listen to their story. It may seem like a wasteful resource, but you will be able to give them the right service and they will be on path to resolution quicker. So now there is a lot of statistics which shows that trans youth find the healthcare system to be, they don't trust it, they don't enter it, they don't go for the second visit. Can we just change the sequence of how we design our services? Like instead of the patient reaching out and having to call and then face the discrimination, could there be a totally different service design which just changes the sequence and the way resources interact? How that would look like? An open question. From employees' point of view, I would say there is theory which exists, like social capital theory, how having, a specific kind of volunteers in nonprofit can enhance the impact that the nonprofit creates, the donations that the nonprofit raises. And then at the same time, there is a theory which talks about how inclusion of LGBTQ volunteers sometimes brings more legitimacy to certain causes. So then I was articulating, could we use these two things and marry them together to have a better volunteering composition? My spouse worked as flight attendant many, many years ago, and he told me that whenever it was LGBTQ members in the flight attendant staff on the flight, the whole atmosphere was different. The resolutions were quicker. It was cheerful. Could we test that theory? Maybe Delta can share the team composition data with us and we could figure this out. And then from the supply chain perspective, what I wanted to highlight was that we have used several of our resources to, several of our research tools to propagate sustainability from one part of the world to far ends of the world because supply chains are complex. Could we do the same things about LGBTQ inclusion? So these were the topics I touched upon, and I'll just briefly say maybe 1 minute about the topic that I'm working on. So there is research which I refer to by Chris Parker and his co-authors on how when ride-sharing drivers, they put, when the ride-sharing riders put a rainbow flag or a filter in their profile picture, their ride is more likely to get canceled. We wanted to flip the story because nowadays, there are several online apps that want to match clients with servers can actually indicate their LGBTQ friendliness or inclusion through rainbow stickers. But then just in my own household, my husband wanted someone who has rainbow sticker and nothing else mattered. To me, it mattered was how good are the communication skills, and maybe the rainbow sticker was second. So we want to run experiments to see how does this signaling of LGBTQ inclusion actually change the whole service package? Does it compensate for the topmost requirement of the client? Does it compensate for the ancillary requirement? Does it enhance few things? Does it complement few things? Does it have a spillover effect on women looking for a server who will be more inclusive? So these are the questions we want to test through an experiment, and hopefully we'll have a paper in a few months.
Excellent. Yeah, that's very exciting. Hoping you find some cool results from that. So what we've talked about, how our research as operations researchers, we like to feel comfortable in systems, but it's so important to highlight the human, understand the human element, and then start designing and improving your systems. But I want to talk about a different human element, which is the researcher element. So what's one thing that you would like to see, which to encourage more researchers in your field engage with LGBTQ plus research topics? And this is open to anyone.
I can go maybe. The first thing that comes to my mind as a researcher is funding opportunities, I would say. The funding agencies should start LGBTQ issues, like problems that they're facing, like we should have more funding opportunities that focus on this. Also, another thing that comes to my mind is journals having special issues that focus on LGBTQ issues. Those are the couple of things that came to my mind.
And I would think,
Sorry,
would,
we
oh,
can't hear.
sorry. Go ahead.
Let's do Priyank and then
Okay, I
Suleiman.
wanted to piggyback on what Aaron was saying. So I think Max, Lee, and Laura recently sent out a email for all the Pride Forum members that NSF has called for like a Dear Colleague letter on NSF grants for LGBTQ research in STEM. So a few of us are working on creating a proposal to get more funding to propagate this research community. So I took this question to mean, how can we make sure that there is a path which is free from conscious, unconscious biases to get this research published? And for that, I think apart from special issues, which gives us research to stand, the shoulders of the research to stand on, we also need developmental review teams. So we need more representation at the editorial panels. We need to have mini workshops where we can bring together researchers, like several of our panelists, audience members, so that we could enhance each other's research and then know that, yes, we have to have rigorous research, technically sound research, but these are the people who actually are going to help develop this research rather than be gatekeepers. So if we have more financial support, we could have people fly into a place and create this sort of developmental discourse there.
Maybe one more minute each if you have something to add, Suleiman.
Yeah, very quickly. I think also to just kind of dovetailing on the other comments, mentorship, I think, also plays a crucial role in the process, right? So, matching experienced researchers and faculty members to who are already working in the areas of LGBTQ plus research or topics, as an example, they can actually be a good support and mentor for younger researchers who are interested in that field as well. And I think, they can provide guidance, encouragement, practical support, tangible things that those individuals will probably need as they're kind of beginning in their journey of becoming researchers who are studying this area. And I also think that mentorship programs could also be formalized, within social work or any other kind of academic units or departments as a way of connecting students and early career researchers with mentors who, again, as I said, have experiences in LGBTQ issues. So mentors, I think, will be important.
And build off of that, I want to mention that AEA does one-on-one mentoring programs. So if we have any students or junior faculty in the audience, please check out the CSCOEP's website. I joined as a junior mentor at a queer economics PhD student mentoring conference last summer. It was absolutely amazing. So that's definitely very important, especially knowing that minority individuals tend to get less unofficial or sometimes even official type of mentoring. So that's important. I also want to mention one thing that made me think after Priyank's comment on econ being a few decades ahead. So I thought of why. I think the reason for that perhaps is the reason why we have this community, the reason why all of these events are taking place, because I've been lucky to have so many amazing people in economics who were at the forefront of making these changes and creating the community, providing support and paying forward. So for all of us and others, we just need to be involved in those communities and paying forward and creating the supportive, amazing environment like you guys are doing today. Leah and Tyler, thank you for that. So this is exactly what we need more of.
One
That's
last thing
excellent.
to say that actually I want to highlight if it reaches the years. I have organized so many panels in the last few years on DI and ORMS. I would like to see senior researchers, editors show up to those panels just to legitimize these topics. It's usually young folks, postdocs, early careers who are there, but we need our senior researchers to just show up and show their support. It's very important.
That's all excellent advice. And, future promising, we'll all be senior future faculty, and then we can play that role. And so I'm very excited to host y'all and instigate that process. We're running low on time. Leah, are there any questions that stand out to you at Q&A that you'd like to bring up?
No, so for now, there's no question in the Q&A, but maybe we have time for one or two if you want to ask questions.
So to the audience, if you want to put in the chat or the Q&A, we both have eyes on them. We can take one or maybe two questions.
Maybe in the meantime, I can ask one question I have for you. I would be curious because I think all the four of you have a lot of experience gathering survey data, and I can imagine it's a really difficult process, especially when you are targeting such a specific population. Do you have any advice on how to be able actually to do that, and what can help?
Any final thoughts on Leah's question for survey design or otherwise for tools for resources?
I can maybe talk about it. I think I like briefly heard the question. So Leah, you asked how we handled gathering the data, and if you have any advice on gathering it, right? Okay. It was a difficult process, but having an interdisciplinary team helped. We were always working with social workers from NYU, and actually maybe some of them are also joining us today. And also partnering with organizations, creating a safe space for youth. So, for example, we went to them, and obviously, just like Suleiman said, compensation was a big thing. We needed to encourage them, and we needed to say that we're asking for your 20 minutes, and some questions here might feel you make uncomfortable. And after you take the survey, like, please come back to us, and if we can help you in any way, like, we're here to help you. This is to learn from you, not to take anything from you. This information that we're gathering, we want to circle it back to you in a positive impact, like in that way. So we needed to create this safe communication. But of course, while you're gathering data from a younger individuals, we have had surveys that were completed in like under 3 minutes, where we were like, you definitely didn't complete the survey, which is okay. But this happens. So my advice would be creating a safe environment, making the participants feel safe.
For sake of time, I think I'll start wrapping up. I'll highlight Gabrielle or Yaren. Gabrielle in the audience has a fascinating question for you. So Gabrielle, I encourage you to email her. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer that. So today, what we've heard about are many great ways to enact good OR for social good. Starts with foundational ethical principles, moves forward, take research tools, which can be used either at a localized scale or for large-scale systemic analyses. I really want to thank all of our panelists here and Leah for hosting, Chelsea from Informs. So thank you to the panelists for your forward-thinking research and for sharing your experience and your perspectives with us all. We hope this panel has inspired both established and growing researchers to enter this field, to become engaged, to do something more. And maybe this will be the first of many webinars. Time will tell. But I want to thank you all and wish you a great Monday. And please feel free to email any of us if you have any lasting questions.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah and Tyler.